To today's class. This is the final class for the webinars, 70 SHRM-CP and SHRM-SCP questions. The way it works with this webinar is you're going to have a pen and a paper, and you try to answer each question. And then as we proceed, I'll take off the blue box and explain to you why this is the answer and why these other options are wrong. And then we proceed that way till we get to the 70. Till we get through all 70 questions. All right, so we're just going to jump right into this. Question 1 says, which world legal system is based primarily on legal precedent? A, criminal law, B, common law, C, civil law, and D, religious law. So write on your paper which you think is the right answer, and then I'll take off the blue box and explain. All right, hopefully you have your answer now. And the answer is B, it's common law. And that's because common law is known as judicial precedents that have been passed down over time. So you have court cases that judges over the years have determined, and it has been seen by most people, or the legal system has seen this to be what the law says on this particular issue. So it's judicial precedents that have been passed down over time. And like it says, it's based primarily on previous judgments by courts. In court cases, the lawyers point to precedents to say, this is a precedent of what happened in this case before. This has been commonly or generally agreed as what the law says on this, and that's common law. Now, that's different from what you have with legislation, like the in the United States, you have the legislature arm, which is the House of Senate, House of Representatives. They put law in place, and those laws are more civil laws. Those laws are acts that are created by legislation. But here, the answer is common law. It's made by judges, passed down over time, commonly agreed as what the law says on a variety of issues. All right, let's move to question 2. And it says, a software company is opening a facility in China. Some US management and key personnel will be transferred. However, most new employees will be hired in China. Company executives want more information about the Chinese workforce, including a workforce evaluation of the labor market in China. What first steps should be accomplished as soon as possible? A, conducting a supply analysis of available employees. B, identifying flexible staffing arrangements available in the new region. C, completing replacement and succession plans for the new facility. D, creating a talent acquisition strategy to recruit skilled talent. Which do you think is the first step that should be accomplished as soon as possible? And like I always say in this webinars, when you're done reading the question and the options, I always advise that you go back and read the last question here, just this question here, that allows you to know exactly what the question is asking for. Because in the midst of the myriad of all that information, you want to still make sure you specifically know what the question is asking of you so you can know the right option to select. All right, hopefully you've gotten your answer now. The answer is A, conducting a supply analysis of available employees. And this is because when you do a workforce planning, the first thing you want to do is make sure that as HR, the HR strategy comes from the overall organization strategy. HR must make sure that everything it does is connected to what the organization strategy is. HR cannot work in silos or work separate from where the organization as a whole is going. And by making sure that HR is aligned with the organization strategy and everything HR does is cascaded from the organization strategy, then HR is actually helping to achieve that strategy. So that's the first thing HR needs to do. Make sure there's clarity on the objectives they have. It's cascaded. It's helping to support the organization strategy. Then the next thing is to do the supply analysis. HR wants to make sure that you are doing a supply analysis first. You first want to know where you are, the workforce that you have available. Like it says here, evaluating the current supply of US workers and Chinese workers will help to identify the skill sets required and how many workers from each country will be needed. So it says, note in workforce planning, supply analysis comes first, then a demand analysis. Then you want to do that demand to say, what do we actually need? First, you say, what do we have? That's your supply. What do we currently have? And what's the talent that's available to us? Then your demand will be, what do we need to be able to achieve the organization strategy? Then you do a gap analysis to know the difference between what you currently have and what you need. And then when you find that gap, you need to have a solution analysis to be able to bridge that gap, to be able to say, this is what we're going to do to bridge the gap that we have. All right, so this is just an image that helps to explain what I had been talking about. First, you want to analyze your objectives, make sure that HR objectives comes from the organization strategy. Next, you want to check an inventory of your current human resources. What do you currently have? This is also the supply analysis. Then you want to do your demand analysis and find out what's the demand that you need, what's the demand in terms of people that you need to be able to achieve that organization's goal. Then you determine the gap and you formulate a plan. This is your solution, the plan you would put in place to help you to achieve what you intend to. Implement that plan, then monitor, control, and feedback. Make sure you're monitoring what's going on. Control majorly means that you're making sure that everything is going according to plan. There's no deviation from the plan. And then feedback is making sure you're doing an evaluation, getting feedback to see if you're actually helping to meet that organization's goals and strategies with the plan that has been implemented. All right, moving very quickly. Question 3, organizations should design orientation programs that enable new employees to meet the rest of the employees, A, after they have adapted to the job, B, as soon as possible, C, one at a time, D, within 60 days. All right, the answer is B, as soon as possible. When you have orientation, this, like it says, refers to the process of induction of new hires or the introduction of current employees to new technologies, procedures, and policies at the workplace, or when you have lateral transfers. And lateral transfers just means that the same place of authority, the same seniority level, or the same level of position, but the person is changing functions. The person is probably moving from the HR department to, let's say, the IT or the finance department. And so they're able to acquire new skills, new knowledge about different areas of the organization, but it's not a promotion whereby they are moved to a higher level of authority. And so when you have orientation programs, like it says, it should be designed to get the employees up to speed as soon as possible, because you want them to be able to start being able to be effective on their job as soon as possible. All right, question 4. Under the ADA, this is the Americans with Disabilities Act. A, those addicted to legal prescription drugs are not considered disabled. B, current illegal drug users are considered disabled. C, recovering substance abusers are considered disabled. D, addiction to alcohol is not considered a disability. So write down your answer, and then we take the blue box off. All right, the answer is C. current legal, recovering substance abusers are considered disabled. Under the ADA, those that currently use illegal drugs, they are not protected, but recovering addicts are protected under the ADA. An alcoholic is generally a person with a disability under the ADA. Now, with the Americans with Disabilities Act, it basically states that if someone has alcoholism or is an alcoholic, they are considered disabled. They are protected by this law. But if someone is currently using illegal drugs, they are not considered disabled. They are not protected by the ADA. Now, if someone is no longer using illegal drugs, they're now probably in a rehab program or they're recovering, they are considered disabled and they are protected because they're no longer using the drugs and they are recovering now. But if they are currently using illegal drugs, they are not considered disabled. The law does not protect them. But if someone is using what would be considered a drug or an addictive drug or opioid, and it's something that was prescribed to them by a medical professional, by a doctor, then this law, ADA, protects them as well. All right, scenario. A 170 employee manufacturing company has won a $3 million government contract and must produce 60,000 aircraft parts over the next 3 months. Presently, the production department runs 2 shifts and utilizes 60 skilled workers per shift. Normal production for the company is 50,000 parts per month. The company must maintain current production and fulfill the new order. Currently, it has 10,000 parts in inventory. All right, now to the question. The first step the production department should take is to A, determine the production and quality standard required to meet its new and existing business. B, hire new staff to meet the additional demand. C, calculate the profit margins to determine the work that can be done, to determine if the work can be done. D, immediately require its workers to work overtime. Again, try to determine what's your answer, and then we'll talk about that. All right, the answer is A. Now, when it comes to every time you see a question that says the first step, it means that you want to check out what is needed. What do we need to do? Whether it's a need analysis, needs assessment, needs identification, that's often the first step, making sure you know what is needed, what is required. That's often the first step. And so like it says, the first step in HR programs, projects, initiatives is often to determine the needs, while the most important step is most likely to obtain senior management approval. And that's really important because if you do not get senior management approval, you're probably not going to get funding, you're probably not going to get people to follow what you want them to do, and it's probably going to die a slow death or a quick death because senior management do not approve of it, they do not see it as being important with where the organization is going. So most likely the most important step would be making sure you get senior management approval. But when it says the first step, it's most likely that's going to be a needs analysis or a needs identification or a needs assessment. And so like it says here, needs identification is the process of discovering the requirements, constraints, and motivations for a particular initiative. It is important to know what is needed before preferring a solution. You first want to know what you need, what is required, before you start looking at different options towards solving a problem. All right, with this same scenario, let's look at question 6. And he says here, which of the following staffing strategies will work best in this situation? A, require present workers to work overtime. B, hire temporary workers for a 3rd shift. C, add quality inspection to ensure that the parts meet quality standards. D, ask managers to assist in the production area. So again, like I said, once you're done reading through, go back and read the question to be sure that you know what exactly the right option should be. Okay, so the answer is A. Like it says here, a company's workers are skilled and can be asked, the company's workers are skilled and can be asked to work overtime to meet the other requirements. Note that the project is for 3 months only and temporary workers will have to be recruited and trained. If you had picked B as your answer, that's not correct because getting temporary workers, now they have to learn the skills, they will have to be trained. There's the time of recruiting them as well. And this project is just for 3 months. So the best option will be requiring the present workers to work overtime. And if you see something here, let me get back to the scenario. You would see where it says that it's for 3 months. So overtime is a good option. They currently have 2 shifts and they use 60 skilled workers per shift. So if they were going to even have 3 shifts, that means it's going to be 180 skilled workers. So they could do overtime or they could have a 3rd shift, and then they'll be able to meet that demand of the 60,000 aircraft. And because they're already producing 50,000 parts per month, it's feasible. The best thing is just to get the skilled workers that you already have to work overtime. So like it says, the most cost-effective strategy that would ensure quality standards are maintained will be to have current workers work overtime. All right, let's look at question 7. Because the company is a government contractor, it is required to A, abide by EEOC requirements in all its selection procedures, B, allow employees to view the information in their personnel files, C, have a formal affirmative action plan, D, establish a quota system for hiring minority employees. Again, try to determine which you think is the right answer. Have that on your paper, and then we'll discuss. All right, the answer is C, have a formal affirmative action plan. And at this point, I just want you guys to know what the OFCCP is about. So you have the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. It's an office of the US DOL, Department of Labor, as you guys can see here. And the OFCCP, it administers and enforces 3 equal employment opportunity mandates described below. So you see here, you have Executive Order 11246, Section 503 of the Rehab Act, Vietnam-era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act of 1974. And with this, 3 equal employment opportunity laws, OFCCP is responsible for administering and enforcing them. So this is mainly, like it says, it protects workers from discrimination, requires companies doing business with the federal government to take certain affirmative steps to ensure equal employment opportunity. And it applies to those that have federal contracts with the government. And they also have to meet specific dollar thresholds. And this is what it looks like. All right, for Executive Order 11246, like it says here, it applies to a business or businesses with federal contract, federally assisted construction contracts, if those contracts are more than 10,000. So if you have 10,000 plus in contract, you have to abide by Executive Order 11246. And basically what it says is, as a condition of this contract, businesses agree not to discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and national origin, and to take affirmative action to ensure equal employment opportunity. And so they also agree that they're not going to take adverse employment actions against applicant or employees who ask about, discuss, or share information about their pay or the pay of their co-workers. And so that's the first level for Executive Order 11246. Now that the second level is if a company has at least 50 employees and a single contract of $50,000 or more, then it has to develop an affirmative action program, AAP. So the first level is making sure they do not discriminate on all these areas and take affirmative action, but they don't necessarily need to have a formal affirmative action plan if they just have 10,000 in federal contract. But a company that has 50 employees, single contract of $50,000 or more, then they must have a formal affirmative action plan. All right. Now, Section 503, which is the second law mandate, basically says every time you see the Rehabilitation Act, it means protecting people with disabilities. So here, under Section 503, like it says, business with a federal contract of more than $10,000 is required to treat qualified individuals with disabilities without discrimination on the basis of their physical or mental disability in all employment practices, and to take affirmative action to employ and advance in employment individuals with disabilities. So even though it says 10,000 here, it's been adjusted to 15,000 for inflation. And that's the first level. So if you have 15,000 in the federal contract and you're a federal contractor, then you have to make sure you do not discriminate against those that have disabilities, whether physical, whether mental. Now, the second level is if you have 50 employees and single contracts of $50,000 or more, just like we talked about with the EO 11246. If you have 50 employees or $50,000 or more, then you would also have to develop a Section 503 AAP. And moving on to VEVRA, this is the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act, and basically protects veterans. So if you're a business with a federal contract of 100,000, it's been adjusted to 150,000 for inflation, then you are required to treat qualified individuals without discrimination based on their status as a protected veteran in all employment practices, and to take affirmative action to employ and advance in employment protected veterans. Like it says here, it's been adjusted to $150,000 for inflation. Now there's also the AAP requirement as well. If a company has 50 employees, single contract of $150,000 or more, then it must develop the VEVRA AAP, Affirmative Action Plan. And this is what the infographic looks like, which just gives a very pictorial image of what we've been talking about. So here you see Executive Order 11246. And so the basic coverage, if you have any number of employees, contract more than $10,000, then you need to, you're covered by Executive Order 11246. The AAP coverage comes when you have 50 or more employees, contracts of $50,000 or more. Section 503 as well. Basic coverage, contracts of more than 15,000. AAP coverage, 50 employees, contracts of $50,000 or more. With VEVRA, basic coverage, one second. Okay. Basic coverage is any number of employees, a contract of $150,000 or more. And then the AAP coverage is if you have 50 or more employees and a contract of $150,000 or more. All right, so I just wanted to show that to you so you could understand question 7 better. Like it says, because the company is a government contractor, it is required to A, abide, we already talked about that, but the reason why C is the answer is because being a government contractor and because all those things we just talked about applies to this company, they need to have a formal affirmative action plan. If we go back to the scenario, you see here that they have 3 million in government contracts. So they have to abide by all three: Executive Order 11246, Rehab, Section 503 of the Rehab Act, VEVA. And because they have more than 50 employees, 170 employee, they are covered by those OFCCP requirements. And so they need to have a formal affirmative action plan. And we already talked about OFCCP, how they administer and enforce those three laws. And that's why C is the answer for that. All right, let's move to question 8. When using benchmarking, A, it is best to collect the data on an as needed basis rather than over an inflexible time frame. B, the resulting statistics are comparable across organizations and industries. C, HR managers are able to identify the reasons why HR functions are below standard. D, it is best to compare ratios from year to year. Which do you think is the best answer? All right. The answer is D. Like it says, it's best to compare ratios from year to year. So when you do benchmarking, like it says, it's the practice of comparing business processes and performance metrics to industry best practices from other companies. So you want to compare what you were doing with what other companies in your industry or your competition, how they are doing as well. And you usually have the dimensions that will be measured: wages, salary, quality, time, and cost. And it's best that these comparisons are done on a yearly basis. So when you have your ratios, this is what we pay compared to what this other company pays. You want to do that on a yearly basis so you can track and see where there are trends, where there are spikes, and be able to track that and see the trends in terms of maybe pay, in terms of salary, things like that. And you want to compare that from year to year. Rather than do just a one-time activity. All right, question 9. In order to add value to the human capital of the organization, HR must have good metrics about the HR side of the business. HR managers must be focused on reducing the total cost of labor. The HR function must form the interface between the external environment of the organization and its internal environment. And D, HR policies and practices should result in a workforce with a maximum quantity and maximum quality needed to achieve productivity goals. All right, what do you think is the right answer? It's A, HR must have good metrics about the HR side of the business. And if by any chance you selected D, remember that D says maximum quantity, a workforce with a maximum quantity and maximum quality. And maximum quantity is wrong because you don't want to have as many people as possible, but you want to have just the right amount of people and then be able to get them to work at maximum quality. But to have the quantity that is maximum, that makes that wrong. And so, like it says, HR must have good metrics about the HR side of the business. Now, when you see the term human capital, that has to do with seeing, the human beings or the employees as an economic resource, the economic value of the human resources. And so whenever you're checking things in terms of economic value, you want to make sure you're using objective data, you're using metrics to be able to show how HR is adding value, and to be able to give measurable information about the economic value that HR is bringing or the human capital is bringing to the organization. So it says here, measuring HR information and data helps organizations figure out their people strategy for the future, recognizing what is working well for the organization, what needs improvement, and what trends can be expected down the line. All right, let's take time to look at this picture again. We have several pictures in this questions, and I think it's really helpful to help you see in pictures what it looks like in terms of HR metrics. All right, so this is time to hire, cost per hire, early turnover, time since last promotion, revenue per employee. This is very key in terms of how much revenue comes in per employee when you're looking at economic value of the human capital. So you have performance and potential, billable hours per employee, engagement rating, cost of HR per employee, ratio of HR professionals to employee, ratio of HR business partners per employee, turnover, effectiveness of HR software, absenteeism. Those are key HR metrics that helps to show the value that HR is bringing to the organization in terms of numbers, in terms of objective data that can be measured and seen to be accurate. All right, let's look at 10. Under the ONE Act, employers must give employees 60 days notice of any layoffs caused by financial problems or facility closures. B, employees must be notified if there will be a mass layoff or facility closing in 60 days. C, employers must give employees who will be laid off during a facility closing 60 days notice. Employers must notify employees 60 days before an impending layoff or facility closure if the state unemployment rate is above 4%. So have the answer on your paper. The answer is B. The ONE Act, Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, it protects workers by requiring employers with 100 or more employees. So only employers that have 100 or more employees are the ones the ONE Act applies to. So employers that have 100 or more employees to provide at least 60 calendar days advance written notice of a planned closing or mass layoff affecting 50 or more employees at a single site of employment. So basically, ONE is saying that you need to let your employees know, and this is for those that have 100 or more employees. You need to let those employees know if you're going to have a planned closing or a mass layoff that's going to affect 50 or more employees. And it's going to be 60 calendar notice, 60 calendar days advance written notice. But you see the reason why B is right and C is wrong, because B says employees must be notified if there will be a mass layoff or facility closing in 60 days, because all employees must be notified. But C says employers must give employees who will be laid off. It's not only the employees who will be laid off that should be given the 60 days notice, but all employees must be notified of that mass layoff or the planned closing. All right, so like it says here, ONE has certain exceptions to the requirements of that 60 calendar day notice when layoffs occur due to unforeseeable business circumstances. So maybe someone has always had a client that buys a lot of stuff from them, but suddenly the client decides not to do business anymore with them. That will be seen as unforeseeable business circumstances. Faltering companies will be a company that is probably close to bankruptcy. They're about to close down, but they are trying to get funding. And if they give that notice, it's going to affect them from being able to get the funding they're trying to get. And then natural disasters, something happened, there was an earthquake, and there was just no way that company could have given the 60 days notice. So those are the exceptions: unforeseeable business circumstances, faltering companies, and natural disasters. Now, employees entitled to notice under ONE include managers, supervisors, hourly, salaried workers, One requires that notice also be given to employee representatives, which is usually the union, the local chief elected official, and the state dislocated worker unit. All right, let's look at 11. It will be a ULP, which is unfair labor practice, to dash during the unionization process. A, forbid distribution of union literature during work hours and in work areas. B, tell the employees the disadvantages of having a union. C, promise employees pay increases if they vote against the union. D, discipline an employee who violated company policy. Which do you think will be the right answer? All right, the answer is C. Promise employees pay increases if they vote against the union. So the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, established by the NLRA, National Labor Relations Act, it has outlined a number of areas that may be construed as unfair labor practices, which could be done by either the union or by the employer. And here we're talking about the employer in this case, because it says one method that can be used to guide and help prevent ULPs is the acronym TIPS, and this is mainly for the employer, which means threaten, interrogate, promise, or spy. These four things are things that the employer cannot do. If the employer does this, it will be seen as a ULP. And so you see that C talks about promising employees pay increases if they vote against the union. So that's definitely a ULP. But the employer still has a right to be able to say what is true, what is factual. That would not be seen as a ULP. So forbid distribution of union literature during work hours, that is allowed because work hours is the time the employees should be working. Now, if it's break time or if it's not work hours, the employer cannot forbid employees from distributing union literature. But during work hours, the employer can do that. Tell the employees the disadvantages of having a union. The employer can do that because as long as it's true and it's a fact, things like saying if you have a union, you're going to have to pay union dues, and so that's going to be taken out of your pay. You could go on strike, and that could mean an economic strike where those who go on strike could be permanently replaced, things like that. So, and the employer does have a right to do option D, which is discipline an employee who violated company policy. Whether there's a unionization going on or not, the employer still has a right to discipline employees who violate union policy or engage in violence or something like that, something that is against the company's policy. All right, 12. An organization addressing salary compression is most likely in which step of administering a pay structure? A, making pay adjustments. B, maintaining an up-to-date structure. C, processing performance increases. D, dealing with pay inequities. So I'm just going to give you some time to determine which is the right answer and have that on your paper. All right, so the answer is D. Pay compression is when employees who have been in a job for a long time make less than new hires in the same position. So you have employees that, and we're not looking at performance right now, but you have employees that have been with an organization for a long time, and now new employees or new hires that are being brought in to that same position are being paid more. And like it says, this is a form of pay inequity and can result in flight risk. You could actually lose those employees that have been with the organization for a long time. And usually this happens, pay compression or salary compression or wage compression. It happens when there is now a greater demand for that job, especially here in the United States, where you have nurses in very great demand. Maybe when those employees that have been there for a long time, maybe when they were employed, nurses were being paid $20 per hour, but now there's a greater demand for nurses, and so organizations decide to start paying them $25 per hour. The market just increases because there's a greater demand, and so the market pay for that job increases, and so new hires that are coming in now start getting paid $25 per hour, while those that have been there for a long time are still getting paid $20 per hour. So that's kind of like what pay compression looks like. And like I said, it's a pay inequity, and an effective solution to pay compression is to pay employees what they are worth by resolving pay inequities through enacting merit pay structures and market increases across the board. So you want to make sure that you begin to put in market increases. If the market is now paying higher for this job, the organization has to bump up their salary structure to reflect what the market is paying, so that those who have been in the organization for a longer time, they have their pay reflecting what the market is paying and not just the new hires. Merit pay as well, paying people in terms of their performance, in terms of what they merit, that also helps to resolve pay inequities such as salary compression. All right, let's look at question 13. What is the primary difference between direct cost and indirect cost in terms of training and development? Direct costs are any cost greater than $25. Indirect costs are those less than $250. Direct costs are any costs associated with human talent. Indirect costs are those associated with technology, such as computers. Indirect costs are those associated with travel, meals and lodging. Direct costs are other costs associated with training and development. Indirect costs are the cost of operating the entire department. Direct costs are those associated with operating a particular program. Which do you think is the right answer? All right. The answer is D. Okay. So like it says, direct costs are those expenses that directly go into producing goods or providing services, while indirect costs are general business expenses that keep operation going. And I think this was a great pictorial image of the difference between the two. So you have direct cost here, expenses that directly relate with production or providing a service. And so it's also called variable cost because it changes. Direct material, direct labor, direct wages, that will be direct cost. And then indirect costs, general expenses, business expenses, running cost. It's also called fixed cost because it's most likely going to be fixed. It's not going to just change it's not going to change continuously or very, very much because it's fixed. It most likely will stay the same for a long time. And so you have things like rent, office expenses, indirect wages. All right, let's look at question 14. As VP of HR, you're helping your company's executive committee plan a highly experimental manufacturing process. It will be employing unusual, non-traditional technology and work structure to produce an innovative product. there is a significant possibility that the venture will fail. However, if it is successful, the profits will be immense. Your company has manufactured a related product line for over 50 years using traditional methods. With your knowledge of organizational culture, you suggest that A, it will be best to try this process in an existing plant with senior employees selected from the core workforce. B, since this is a new manufacturing process, the appropriate HR policies and procedures will not be apparent until the plant is actually up and running. C, although a new location will be best, it's important that HR policies and procedures promote the organization's traditional and unique culture in the new plant. D, it will be best to try this process with new employees in a separate location with new HR policies and procedures. So read through again. You can go back, like I said before, to check exactly what the question is asking for and determine your right answer. All right, so D is the best option here. And like it says, it will be best to try this process with new employees in a separate location with new HR policies and procedures. Now, note that here, it says it's a highly experimental process. They're going to be using unusual, non-traditional technology, which is different from what the company has been doing using traditional methods. It's an innovative product, so it's totally different from what the organization has previously been doing. And it's highly experimental, it's non-traditional technology, it's not what they're used to. So the best thing to do will be to make sure that you get new employees that have this non-traditional knowledge of how to produce this innovative product. Put them in a separate location, because if they are in the same location where you produce the traditional methods, that is going to affect you being able to produce this innovative product that is going to require non-traditional technology. And then have new HR policies and procedures, because it's all totally different from what you've previously produced with the traditional methods. All right, so like it says here, the best option will be to establish this non-traditional process in a separate location with new HR policies, procedures that are aligned with the innovation and unique nature of this experimental manufacturing process. All right, 15, productivity. A is purely a function of the quantity of output. B is a measure of both quantity and quality. C, measures are possible for jobs. Productivity measures are possible for jobs with a tangible product, but not for jobs with an intangible output, such as services. D is best measured at the organizational level. So determine which is your answer. And it's B, it's a measure of both quantity and quality. So with quantity, you want to make sure you're being efficient. You're not just wasting time, material, and resources in terms of your cost. Then effective, you want to make sure that your product or your services, they are of high quality. So it's both quantity and quality. It's not just quantity or just quality. It has to be both, making sure you have efficiency and effectiveness in your deployment of your resources. All right, let's look at 16. 3 employees are hired to assemble lawn mowers. Each employee is assigned to assemble a different but equally difficult component. Every few weeks, the employees are asked to assemble a new component in addition to the original one to which they were assigned. After 6 months, each employee can assemble a complete lawnmower by himself or herself. This situation is an example of which of the following job design approaches: job enlargement, horizontal loading, group tasking, job enrichment. All right, the answer is A. Job enlargement just means that there's an expansion of the duties and tasks across the same organizational level, while with job enrichment, what you have is a vertical expansion or loading of the roles, responsibilities, increasing authority, increasing skill level for that employee. So with job enrichment, you have that employee being able to find satisfaction in respect to their position, personal growth potential is increased. But with job enlargement, you just have an additional duty or responsibility that is added to that current job description. And you don't necessarily have possibilities of growth or autonomy or increase in your authority like you will have with job enrichment. All right, let's look at question 17. The union has submitted a written request to management for a designated time to hold a meeting as part of its campaign organizing activities. Which of the following actions is management most likely to take? A, use the meeting as an opportunity to demonstrate good faith bargaining. B, refuse to allow time for the meeting. C, schedule the meeting no later than 2 weeks prior to the election. And D, contest the appropriateness of the meeting request with the NLRB. So again, try to decide which you think is the best answer, and then I will discuss it. All right, so the answer is B, refuse to allow time for that meeting, because right now the union is still at the organizing phase. They're still trying to organize the employees, they're campaigning, so the employees can see them as the union, they want to represent them, they're still trying to organize, they are not yet the official union for those employees. And so at this point, management does not necessarily want to give them time or meetings or things like that, because management is also trying to make sure that they do not have a union as a third party coming between management and its employees. So like it says in the explanation, a union organizing campaign is essentially a drive or movement to form a union within an organization. At the stage of a union organizing campaign, management has no obligation to grant that union, which is not the employee representative, a designated time to hold campaign meetings. Now, if the union is able to get the employees, at least 30% of the employees to sign a petition, and that petition gets to the NLRB, and the NLRB determines that, okay, that's sufficient to have an election, then that's when the union is then taken more seriously. You then have the employer having to give the union the voters list and things like that. But here in this case where the union is just still trying to campaign, the employer has no responsibilities towards the union. All right, let's look at question 18. And it says here, it says, gaps between actual and desired performance are best identified in which phase of the ADI process? A, development, B, design, C, analysis, D, evaluation. The answer is C, analysis. So when you're trying to find the gaps between actual and desired performance, this is where you're trying to find out the needs. What do we need? Or what do the employees need to be trained about? What are their skill level right now, what should it be? That's the actual skill level, and then the desired skill level. And then what's the difference? What's the gap between the actual and the desired? And it says during the analysis phase of the ADDIE model, the trainer will identify the instructional problems, instructional objectives, learning environment, and existing skill sets of the learners. This is also the stage where the gaps between actual versus desired performance is determined. So in the analysis stage, that's where you determine what exactly are the instructional problems, what is needed, what are the gaps. And here's a very good pictorial image of the ADDIE model. And as you can see here, here you have analyze, and you see where it talks about instructional goals, respond to competency gaps caused by lack of knowledge and skills, state desired outcomes of a successful course of completion, target audience characteristics, required resources. Then here, you have learning objectives in design. You want to know what your learning objectives are, instructional strategies. You want to find out your course content, the link between that and the learning objectives. Make sure there's a very clear link. Introduce content and learning activities in a logical sequence. Then you have your testing strategies as well. Then you move to the develop stage. And here you generate your learning resources. So this is kind of like having the course content, and this is putting flesh to the course content. So here you determine what your course content is going to look like, and then you begin to fill that up. So you get your learning resources, validation of resources, making sure that your resources are accurate to what is needed. Then the pilot test. Here you have a pilot test, get a very few group of people, probably even some of those that will be trained, and have them take that training, just a very few of them. And based on their insights, based on their feedback, you can then make final adjustment to the training before it's finally implemented to everyone. Here in the implement stage, you have preparation of your instructors and train the trainer workshops. You have participant engagement. This is where the training actually takes place. Notification of those that will be trained, enrollment of those that will be trained. Then here in evaluate, you have formative evaluation, which takes place prior to implementation. So it could take place design, it could take place in develop, but usually with formative evaluation, you have what is called the pre-test and post-test. So you have the pre-test, which is most likely in design before you have the training. You test those that will be trained to see their level of knowledge at that stage. Then you have the post-test after they are trained, and you compare that to see if there's been any difference before they had the training and then after they had that training. So with formative evaluation, you also have the pilot test. So you can see that also happens before the implementation. So this is conducted prior to implementation. Then you have another type of evaluation, which is summative evaluation. This happens after implementation. And this is where you have the Kirkpatrick model of reaction, learning, behavior, and results. And reaction is how did the participants, how did they see the training? How did they feel the instructor did? And then you have learning, which basically is, did they acquire the knowledge and the skills that they were taught in the training? Then you have behavior. Did they apply the knowledge and skills? So it's one thing to learn something, and it's another thing to actually apply what was learned. And then you have results, which is where the application of the training, the knowledge, the skills now results in business performance or increased business performance or business success. Maybe there could be an increase in the return on investment that could be traced back to the training and the people applying what they had learned. Or it could even be something like safety. Before, there were very low levels of safety, but after the training, you now have higher levels of safety. So results basically is the organizational performance. This is really where you see the results of that training and how it impacted the organization. All right, let's look at 19. A manufacturing organization in its strategic planning process has asked the HR director to be closely involved in all steps of the process. How best can the HR director support the organization in establishing a competitive advantage? A, recruit talent based on competences and qualifications to support the achievement of the organization's goals and objectives. B, supply market intelligence on base pay and incentive pay to ensure the organization has a lead position in the marketplace. C, conduct regular employee engagement surveys and present the outcomes to senior management. D, develop internal policies and tactical procedures to support organizational culture and climate. So write down on your paper which you think is the right answer. All right, the answer is A. Competent talent that are hired in a bid to ensure the organization achieves its goals and objectives is a key avenue through which HR can support an organization in establishing its competitive advantage. So here, I want you to take note that these exams, they want to make sure that HR professionals know that they have to align everything HR does with the organization's overall strategy. So HR, whenever you're picking an option that is strategic, it most likely is going to be the correct answer. So here you see competitive advantage, which is a key term when it comes to organizational strategy. And the best thing HR can do is to make sure that the talents that you're bringing in, they have the competences and qualifications that helps that organization in achieving its goals and objectives. So no matter what else it is that HR is doing, if HR is not helping the organization in achieving its overall goals and objectives, then HR has failed. So I want you to always look out for options, especially if the question is talking about strategic. Here it talks about strategic planning, talks about competitive advantage, which is a very core strategic word. When you see words like that and the question is asking for HR to contribute in organizational strategy, I want you to look for an option that is also strategic. And the most strategic option is A, because it talks about HR making sure that the talent that HR recruits is towards helping the organization achieve its goals and objectives. All right, question 20. The purpose of DASH is to give the qualifications needed to perform the job satisfactorily. A, essential function statements. B, performance standards. C, job standards. And D, job specifications. All right. The answer is D. And as you can see, whenever you see a question talks about just the qualifications needed to perform the job satisfactorily, then it is job specifications. Job specification, just like the word connotes, it's very specific. It focuses specifically on what is the minimum acceptable qualifications required for an employee to perform the job adequately. So what's the minimum expected qualification? And if you've seen, job adverts in the newspaper or online, what you see most of the time is a job specification. It just specifies the key things needed, the key qualifications needed for that job. The job description will most likely be more detailed and have much more information. Like it says here, job description identifies the essential functions of the job, provides information concerning the duties, responsibilities, who is reporting to who, reporting relationships, hazards of the job, things like that. So with job description, you have the full description of the job, but with job specification, it mainly just states the minimum acceptable qualifications for that job. So like it says here, with job description, it's job oriented. So you have the job description from the job analysis. And that's why you have these arrows here. When you do a job analysis, which is the first thing that is done, and also the most important thing that is done, from the job analysis, you then get your job description. It's job oriented, job identification, summary, relation to other jobs, location, responsibilities, conditions, location, hazards. But with the job specification, like I said, this is a keyword specific. It wants to just get the minimum acceptable qualifications. And most likely that's what you see when someone posts a job online. And so like it says here, it's employee oriented, just states the education experience, training, initiative, physical effort, physical skills, communication skills that is required for that job.